Three men walk into the most secure prison in American history. The FBI spent 70 years trying to find them. They researched the bay, interviewed families, sent agents to South America. They never found a single body. In 1979, they closed the case, officially presumed drowned. Case closed, except the US Marshals Service, they never closed. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers are still right now today on their active wanted list. On the morning of June 12, 1962, a routine bed check revealed 3 empty cells. In their place, dummy heads, made from plaster, painted flesh tone, with a real human hair pressed into them. They had fooled the night guards completely. Frank Morris, IQ of 133, orphaned at 11, convicted his first crime at 13. The Anglin brothers, sons of poor Georgian farmers, 2 of 14 children, had been trying to escape prison their entire adult lives. These weren't reckless men, they were patient, methodical, and they had been planning this for over a year. They used sharpened spoon to bore through concrete walls. They built a raft from over 15 stolen raincoats, stitching the seams with steam from the prison pipes. They made life jackets, wooden paddles, and one of the night of June 11th, they climbed through ventilation shaft, slid 15 feet down a pipe, cut through the barbed wire fences, and walked into the dark. What happened next, nobody knows for certain, and that's what the story gets complicated. Here's what we do know. Nobody were ever recovered from the bay. The US Marshals believe a raft of paddle were found on Angel Island, with footprints leading away from it. The Anglin brothers' mother received a Christmas card and flowers anonymously every year until her death in 1973. In 2013, a letter arrived in the San Francisco Police Department, claiming to be from John Anglin himself. It said, "I'm going to read this exactly. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with brother Clarence and Frank Morris. Yes, we all made it in that night, but barely. The FBI tested fingerprints, DNA, handwriting analysis. The results were inconclusive, meaning they couldn't confirm it was him, but they couldn't rule it out either. So that's where the official records ends, right there in a limbo. This is where we begin. What you are about to watch is a speculative reconstruction built on the real evidence, the real forensics, and the real gaps in the official investigation. We're going to follow the question the FBI left unanswered, to conclusion grounded in what the science actually suggests. In January 2025, in the version of events, a storm batters the bay, and what it pulls out from the statement doesn't just add to the mystery, it ends it. To understand the tragic end of this story, at least as we imagine it, we must first appreciate the brilliance of its beginning. Frank Morris was no ordinary criminal. Orphaned as an infant, he had been cycling through foster homes and correctional facilities since the age of 13. By the time he arrived at Alcatraz in 1960, he had escaped from multiple prisons and earned a reputation as one of the most cunning inmates in the federal system. Prison records suggest his IQ tested at 133, though the reliability of mid-century prison assessments remains debated. What isn't debated is his intellect. Morris was the architect of the escape, the planner, the problem solver. John and Clarence Anglin were something different. Born into a large, close-knit family of Florida farm workers, the brothers had grown up working the fields and swimming the icy waters of Lake Michigan. They were strong, they were loyal to each other, and unlike Morris, they weren't alone in the world. The Anglin brothers had been convicted of bank robbery. On Alcatraz, they found a partner in Morris, and together the three men turned Cell Block B into a clandestine workshop. Their preparation was a masterclass in patience. Using spoons stolen from the mess hall, their handles sharpened against the concrete floor, they began to chip away at the ventilation grills in their cells. 6 inches of aging concrete stood between them and the utility corridor that ran behind the cell block. At their pace, it would take months. To accelerate the work, Morris salvaged a motor from a prison vacuum cleaner. The noise was concealed during the evening music hour, when inmates were permitted to play instruments. The guards heard accordions, they didn't hear drilling. But the hole was only half the problem. Every night, guards patrolled the cell block, shining flashlights into cells to confirm inmates were in their beds. The men needed decoys. What they created was disturbingly effective. Using a mixture of soap, toilet paper, and concrete dust, they sculpted 3 human heads. Paint from the prison art kit provided skin tones. Real human hair, swept from the barbershop floor, was carefully embedded to create eyebrows, hairlines, and stubble. In the dim light of the cell block, they were indistinguishable from sleeping men. On the night of June 11, 1962, the guards saw exactly what they expected to see. The real men, meanwhile, had ascended the plumbing pipes, crossed the roof under cover of darkness, scaled the barbed wire perimeter fence, and descended to the island's northeast shore. Waiting for them was their final creation, a 6 by 14 foot inflatable raft, assembled from more than 50 stolen prison raincoats, sealed with heat from the steam pipes. They had even constructed a concertina-style bellows from the same material to inflate it. At approximately 11:30 p.m., Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin pushed off from the rocky shore and paddled into the pitch-black waters of San Francisco Bay. The prison wouldn't know they were gone until the 7 a.m. count the following morning. By then, the men and any trace of them had vanished. Nature abhors a vacuum. So does the human imagination. When no bodies surfaced in the days following the escape, the void filled quickly with speculation, with hope, and eventually with myth. The FBI's official investigation concluded in 1979. Their verdict: death by drowning. The waters of the bay that night were 54 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to induce hypothermia within 30 minutes. The tidal currents were notoriously treacherous, capable of pulling even experienced swimmers out to sea. In the Bureau's assessment, the men never made it past the Golden Gate, but the U.S. Marshals Service disagreed. They kept the case officially open, not because they believed the men had survived, but because they couldn't prove they hadn't. And as the years passed, the evidence for survival kept trickling in. There were the postcards. Several arrived in the years after the escape, addressed to the Anglin family, bearing handwriting that relatives swore belonged to Clarence. The postmarks were domestic, then international. The FBI dismissed them as hoaxes. There were the roses every Mother's Day. For years after the escape, the Anglin brothers' mother reportedly received flowers from an anonymous sender. The deliveries allegedly stopped only after her death in 1973. The family believed her sons were alive and watching from afar. And then there was the photograph. In 1975, a snapshot surfaced that allegedly showed John and Clarence Anglin on a farm in Brazil. The image was grainy, the faces unclear, but the family insisted those were their brothers. For decades, the photograph remained a tantalizing piece of ambiguous evidence. Then, in 2015, a team of investigators used digital enhancement to sharpen the image. Some analysts claimed the bone structure matched the Anglin brothers with compelling accuracy. By 2020, modern facial recognition software, trained on thousands of images, reportedly returned a 97% confidence match on the photograph. The finding was never peer-reviewed or officially confirmed, but it electrified conspiracy theorists and true crime enthusiasts around the world. The narrative was irresistible. The system had been beaten. 3 men had outsmarted Alcatraz, the FBI, and the Pacific Ocean itself. It was the happy ending everyone wanted, but science is a double-edged sword. The same technologies that gave hope to believers in 2020 would, in our speculative scenario, become the very tools that dismantled the myth in 2025. In this speculative reconstruction, the breakthrough doesn't come from a tip line. It doesn't come from a deathbed confession or a long-lost witness. It comes from the weather. In January 2025, an extreme atmospheric river event, one of the most powerful in decades, batters the San Francisco Bay Area for 6 consecutive days. The storm surge reaches historic levels. Coastal erosion accelerates dramatically. On the northeast edge of Angel Island, a state park located roughly 1 mile from Alcatraz, the storm strips away a massive section of shoreline. This area had long been considered inaccessible. Submerged boulders, dangerous riptides, and unstable terrain had kept researchers at bay for decades. A team of coastal geologists, dispatched to assess the storm damage, notices something unusual in the newly exposed sediment layer. Embedded in the clay, approximately 3 feet below the original surface, are objects that don't belong to the natural environment. What they find changes everything. Buried in the clay are fragments of a wooden paddle, strips of rotted rubber, later confirmed to be vulcanized rubber consistent with 1960s-era raincoat material, and 3 distinct sets of skeletal remains, preserved in what geologists call a hypoxic sediment seal, an oxygen-deprived layer of clay that had protected them from decomposition for over 60 years. The U.S. Marshals mobilize immediately. This is no longer a cold case. It is an active forensic investigation. Forensic genealogy has advanced dramatically in the 21st century. Investigators extract mitochondrial DNA from bone samples of 2 of the skeletons. The samples are compared against DNA provided by verified Anglin family descendants. The match is definitive. The remains belong to members of the Anglin bloodline. The third body presents a greater challenge. Frank Morris had no known living relatives. The investigators turn to a different method: AI-assisted craniofacial reconstruction. Using Morris's original booking photographs, dental records from his incarceration, and advanced morphological analysis, the forensic team builds a digital model of his skull. The overlap is conclusive within a 95% confidence interval. The mastermind of the Alcatraz escape is accounted for. The photograph from Brazil, under renewed scrutiny, investigators identify lens distortions and shadow inconsistencies that suggest the subjects were likely local farmers with superficial resemblance to the Anglins. The metadata analysis proves inconclusive, but the physical evidence from Angel Island is irrefutable. The men never made it to South America. They never made it anywhere. Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin died within 2 miles of their prison cells, on the night they believed they would become free. With the identities confirmed, forensic anthropologists can now reconstruct, in grim detail, the final hours of the escape. The myth ended on a beach in Brazil. In our speculative scenario, the reality ended in the dark. The men launched their raft at approximately 11:30 p.m. on June 11, 1962. Their intended destination was almost certainly Angel Island, visible from Alcatraz and the closest landfall. From there, they planned to rest, re-inflate the raft, and continue to the Marin County shoreline. What they didn't fully account for was the ebb tide. At that hour, the current was flowing aggressively westward, toward the open ocean. Their homemade paddles, effective in calm water, were nearly useless against the pole. The northeast shore of Angel Island is a graveyard for vessels. Submerged rocks, invisible in the darkness, extend dozens of yards from the beach. The men had no lights, no navigation, only the distant glow of the city to orient them. The prevailing theory at approximately 12:15 a.m., the waterlogged raft, heavy and riding low, was driven by the current directly into the boulder field. The impact was catastrophic. Frank Morris's remains showed clear evidence of perimortem blunt force trauma, an injury sustained at or near the time of death. A fracture to the temporal bone consistent with high-velocity impact against a hard surface. He was likely unconscious, possibly dead, within seconds of the collision. Clarence Anglin's skeleton told a different story, one of desperate struggle. A dislocated shoulder, multiple fractured ribs, injuries consistent with being tumbled violently against rocks while fighting the current. He didn't die on impact, he died trying to survive. John Anglin's remains showed no signs of traumatic injury. His death was quieter. The water temperature that night was 54 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, hypothermia can set in within 20 minutes. Loss of motor control, confusion, exhaustion, and then simply stillness. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers reruns the tidal simulations using modern modeling software. The data aligns perfectly with the location of the remains. The ebb tide carried them directly into the most dangerous section of the Angel Island shoreline. They crossed the channel. They nearly made it to land, but the Pacific doesn't negotiate, and the cold doesn't wait.
So here's where we land. Frank Morris, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin, 3 men who spent over a year quietly carving through concrete walls with spoons, who built a raft out of stolen raincoats, who made the fake heads out of soap and hair so convincing that the guards didn't notice until morning. Honestly, this part still gets me every time. They got out, that part is real, that part actually happened. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers broke out of the most secure federal prison in American history on the night of June 11th, 1962. Nobody has ever seriously disputed that. What this film imagined, and I want to be straight with you, is what happened after the war. Because here's the truth the official records gave us. The water the night was somewhere between 50 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit. The current can hit 6 knots and the raft made of raincoats. And those conditions in the dark, that's not a plan. That's a prayer. I spent a lot of time with this story, and I'll be honest with you, I want them to make it. I think most people do. There is something about 3 guys with spoons and raincoats outsmarting the entire US government. That just feels right. like a story that should have a happy ending. But The Wire doesn't care about a good story. The FBI spent 17 years on this case. Their conclusion was that the raft most likely broke apart, and the 3 men died of hypothermia. Their bodies swept out to sea by the currents. No dramatic capture, no beach in Brazil, just cold water in silence. What hurts about that, and I think it's okay to say it hurts, is that the Bay didn't beat them because they weren't smart enough, or brave enough, or didn't try hard enough. They beat everything a human being built to stop them. Every lock, every guard, every wall. They just couldn't beat 53-degree water and current that didn't know their names. Now, and I really mean this, I could be wrong, this film could be wrong. The US Marshal Service has never closed their investigation. The warrant is still active. People are still sending in leads. Maybe someone out there, 3 very old men, just watched this and are pretty annoyed with me right now. I hope so, genuinely. What I know for sure is this: whatever happened after the raft hit the water, those 3 men gave everything they had. And for one night in June of 1962, 3 guys with no money, no weapons, and no outside help made the most powerful prison in America look completely foolish. That part nobody can take away.